and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm Philip Colfox from Symonsbury Estate, which is outside Bridport, and you can see there in the bottom of the slide a picture of Comus Hill, which is a landmark around the Bridport area. You might recognise it, you might not. If you've ever been to Bridport and you're in the High Street and you looked due west down the High Street, you can see it in the distance. And we're a farm of 1,500 acres and houses and old farm buildings, which are now let out to commercial tenants mainly. And then we've got holiday houses, which are often old farmhouses. And we've got a wedding venue and a cafe and a shop and sort of visitor centre. And we're trying to grow our own food and use it in our restaurant and for our wedding venues. And we're trying to put that through our shop as well. Our shop mainly sells knickknacks. I mean, it's it's called Home and Garden, but we're trying to build the food side of that as well. And our motto is connecting to the life-giving force of the land, but that really comes out differently every time I write it. How do I get to the next slide? Here we go.
Yeah,
I got it. What was that? What was that why to? I'm just going to look back. Oh yes. So why do we want to connect to the? Well, actually, that was asking a different question, which is why do we want to connect people to the life-giving force of the land? Well, I've said it's more profitable because the retail profit is much more than the wholesale profit. So it's much more profitable to have a direct connection with people rather than selling direct to merchants. And some of the merchants we deal with now are so enormous that they, they take all the profit, and there's only a few of them in the market. So there's only sort of like half a dozen almost global companies. There are a few local companies, buying our grain, for instance. There are just one or two locals, and the rest are vast companies. So it's very difficult to negotiate. You can't negotiate, you're a price taker. So the most important thing for us is that our business is about connection between people and land, partly because then we're allowed to set the price ourselves. And the other thing about people, I mean, we'll come on to this in a second, is that nature itself needs variety. And I try and make the link that it's people that create that variety. So variety, let's see if the next, I'm jumping into the next slide, I think. Oh no, it's even further on. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So sustainability, I think, is the overall subject that everyone here is interested in. I think you'll probably tell me if I'm wrong. So what can we, as a landowner, as a sort of medium-sized landowner, we're not as big as the biggest. The biggest landowners in Dorset are like 10 to 20 times, or 10 times our, 20 times our size even. We're in the sort of big end. We're in the very small end of big, or the big end of medium. So there's quite a lot. It's quite a lot of land that we're in charge of. So in theory, we can have quite a bit of influence over the natural things that happen. And I said, what can we all do about sustainability? Well, I think helping the earth to heal is obviously very important. I'll talk about that in a minute. Variety, I put that on this slide again, because wildlife is, in my view, is about variety. We don't want just millions of pigeons or something like that. I want to talk about beware lobbyists, because there's a lot of nonsense being talked about, lots of things, lots of different agendas. And my solution is promoting fresh food. We're struggling to get into, to find that market. We've been after it for a long time, but that's my ambition. So on my version of the subject, healing the land, as I said two or three times already, variety. So up in the top right, variety, encouraging variety means a mosaic of habitats. So the key to wildlife and the health of everything involved in the whole system. You know, even farming is different habitats, and the or you know, crop rotations, all that sort of thing. But if you're a naturalist, you'll talk about a mosaic of habitats. On the left, this is just a stock photo that came with the slides, and I thought I'd leave it in. Quite clearly, that's not really a mosaic of habitats. You've got some vast fields. I think there's 100-acre fields, and we're just seeing a snapshot, you know, corner of some of it. But nature works best, you know, wildlife works best with lots of tiny little patches of plants flowering at different times of the year, you know, different heights of vegetation and things like that, which is often created by different animals moving around and so on. I expect most people are familiar with the wilding theory, that you have one or two big beasts like, you know, ancient cattle, which have long since become extinct, that go through pushing trees over, and even the bush elephant from thousands of years ago, the European bush elephant that pushed trees over. And allegedly our landscape was created by those sorts of large animals that were not very precise with their chomping of the grass and things like that. So they leave little patches here and there, and that and many other different types of animals create this mosaic. And we still have to do that. So when we've got those two fields of the road running through them on the left, there is no mosaic there at all. It's just two very large fields and some lovely trees, admittedly, but I expect that's quite a thin hedge there, or it's not very, and it's not got the connectivity and all that sort of thing, so that wildlife can move around. So variety is key, and we're very keen on access to land, because not only is that good for our business, that we've got direct relationships with customers if they come onto our farm and to our visitor centre, but also to create variety, you need different management styles. And so if you've got land in quite small management pockets, so you've got each person who controls a piece of land hasn't got very much, and they've got different management styles, you're inevitably going to get mosaics of different habitats, which is what's good for wildlife. And then once again, getting people onto the land means, which is good for our economic viability, because we get them to engage, and that helps develop this sense of authenticity of the things that we sell, and that gives us premium prices. So I think most people in their heart of hearts would like a great, beautiful landscape and a great and very delicious food and all that sort of thing. The more we as land managers and farmers can engage with them, the more they're going to pay, and that helps fund us to heal the land, you know, to do the things that are slightly more expensive than this vast sort of industrial farming, which you can see a tiny bit of in that thing on the left. So there's a lot in this slide. I don't know whether I've got it over, hopefully. And I'm now on to beware lobbyists. So here are sort of three or four things I want to talk about. One is supermarkets will always talk about consumer choice. Consumer choice is a big lobbying cry, which is designed and very effectively tells the politicians to get stuffed, because consumer choice means if you, Mr. Politician, start regulating things and taking away people's favorite sugar, salt, and this horrible food that's fiberless, and all the convenience that goes with all this heavy processing, then you might get voted out of office. So you've always got to, Mr. Politician, supply what the consumer wants. So typically supermarkets will say that, because it's nice and easy for them. If no one tells them that they can't sell this or they can't sell that, or they got more forms to fill in, they can let this food that is completely dead, it's been dried, it's been separated, it's had all the fiber removed, it's then all been put back together again, still dry possibly, but certainly with no bugs in it. because the bugs destroy the shelf life, and then they can keep it on the shelves forever, for a really long time, years sometimes, ship it all around the world. It's got the lovely pictures on which they can advertise, and it's no different from selling nuts and bolts or boxes of matches or something like that. And it's going to almost last as long as that on the shelf. And if a bug can't eat it, I've really got onto cheap food already. But if a bug can't eat it, then a human definitely shouldn't eat it. You have no idea what they've done to it. Well, you have got some idea, but it's completely different to what they should do, in my opinion. Now, cheap food is another thing we need to watch for. I mean, obviously, cheap food's good, but it's how do you supply? Which food? Currently, the cheap food is what I've just been describing. It's very bad for your health. Consequently, it's costly for the NHS. But the way it's produced is also very bad for nature. And it's really it brings us on to the next slide, next bit of it, as to why the cheap food, the subsidized food, is so bad for you. Is that I call it fingers in the pie. So we're talking about people in the supply trades who are busy lobbying all the time to sell more things to farmers, and then from then on, the rest of the people in the food chain, they're always lobbying for their particular interest. They don't care at all about the health of the people who eat the food. They don't care about the CO2 emissions or any other emissions like that. They don't care about the pollution. All they want is their money, and they want to make sure that farmers carry on using whatever it is that they sell, some of which is great and a lot of which is absolutely ghastly. Now, as we're structured at the moment with our subsidy system, and luckily it is in transition, so hopefully things will get better, but how it's been until very recently is we've got a small farm that really is very small, where we try and do everything as well as we can in terms of conservation and welfare and everything like that. It's not actually registered as organic, but it's as good as organic. I'm not allowed to say that. It employs really quite a lot of people now. When I used to say this, it used to be 2, but I think it's now 6. And they're growing all the food that we eat in our restaurant, we put for our wedding venue, and that we use to make meals that we deliver and things like that. And some of it goes in our shop. But it's a very small farm. It's about 40 acres, employs, as I say, about 6 people. And it gets enough money to pay, in subsidy, to pay, I mean, about 10% of their wages. I haven't redone the sums. It's probably 5% of their wages. Whereas our large farms about 30 times the amount of land, and it employs only 2 people, and it gets 200% of the wage bill paid in subsidy, and the rest goes to all these suppliers of machinery. And so the money that comes in, only of the gross sales, the money that comes in, a lot of it pays, the subsidy will pay for all the wages, and there's some left over, and that will subsidize all the chemicals that we use, and all this machinery that we use, which is fantastic. I'll come on to machinery in a minute. And well, I should have come on to it already. The trouble with machinery is it homogenizes. It does the same to every piece of ground, so you don't get your mosaics. That should have been in an earlier slide. So all this money comes in to subsidize the production of food that's bad for the land, and potentially food that's bad for you. And one of the reasons why that's done is because people are always competing. They want to produce the cheapest possible food they can, and this is a huge subsidy in terms of the total costs of that particular farming sector. Is a huge percentage of their total costs gets paid in subsidy to produce these vast commodity crops which feed the food processing industry. Whereas the nice touchy-feely farming that we'd all like to do is very expensive and doesn't get nearly as much subsidy. So it'd be much better if the subsidies were paid to a different type of farming. So that's another thing to be aware of when I say beware of lobbyists. All these people have got their own agendas. And then a little tiny bugbear of mine, I'm probably talking to the wrong audience here, which is CO2. Beware of the CO2 lobbyists too, with lots of respect, I'm sure, to lots of people here. But greenhouse gas theory, I see as a proxy for a much bigger problem. I like the phrase extinction rebellion because it's a huge problem about overdevelopment and too many people and destroy habitats and lead to loss of extinction of animals and things like that. And we're just another one of those which, if we're not careful, will end up in a bit of trouble too. So I'd just like to say that thing about CO2. If you use the wrong proxy, so the wrong sort of big idea as to what it's all about, and if you simplify it all too much, you can end up with the wrong outcome. And I think the big attack on meat at the moment is potentially going after the wrong thing. And we can discuss if we want to. I don't want to get too much in it, but it's just under my big bugbear: beware lobbyists. But what is the solution to all these things that are going on? How can agriculture become part of the solution? And I think it is fresh food, fresh local food. It is healthy, it's delicious, and it's good for nature. And I'll explain that now, hopefully. So grow kindly to taste nicely. That was my attempt at putting it simply. So to get food to taste nice, to be delicious, you've got to be kind with the way you grow it. So the food grown in your garden undoubtedly will taste nicer than the food grown in a great big field, which has had it's had its soil balanced by people doing soil tests and putting chemicals on, all that sort of thing. It's undoubtedly going to taste much nicer. You probably managed to twist somebody's arm to give you some wonderful manure, which you've stuck on your soil. You've probably got your compost and all that sort of thing. Now, if we can do that on a larger scale, which we do, it's not a huge scale, but it's sort of small, large scale, or very, we're talking about an acre rather than a postage stamp garden size, then that food will taste much better, and it'll be much better for the soil. Local as well, I'm saying spend your money on growing well, because it is more expensive to grow in a sort of non-industrial way. It's slightly more expensive. So spend your money on growing well rather than traveling, bring your food in from a long way. And I've got some radical, I think they're moderately radical, I mean, a bit sort of contentious, shall we say, demands like, why do we subsidize aviation fuel? And we're flying in vegetables from all around the world. It's completely bonkers, in my opinion. So we subsidize it by not taxing it. So grown more locally means you can spend more money on it. And smaller plots, fewer machines, more people, more mosaics, more care. If you're going to be buying fresh food, in my view, it's going to be much smaller businesses, because they won't need the economies of scale where they've got to send it 1 million miles and try and extend their shelf lives and all those sorts of things. You get better food if you don't stress things so much, if you don't push it all so hard. Where do we get to? Yeah, and of course, the food is not only good for health, it also saves all of us money in lower costs for the NHS by being more healthy. So I don't know if anyone reads. There's a doctor who writes in one of the newspapers, is always going on about the problems with metabolic disorder in the NHS. So almost huge amounts of the money that are being spent in the NHS come from too much sugar and too little fiber in the diet, causing this disease, metabolic disorder, which has got, of which diabetes is one, heart disease, and all the other things which we hear about all the time. The degenerative diseases are coming through a poor diet. So if we did it properly, we'd have lower taxes, the NHS wouldn't be so stressed, and we'd have better treatment. But even more importantly, better food is good for bugs. It's good for bugs in the soil, and it's good for bugs in your guts, which is really good for your health. So what are the blockages between redressing this balance, really, between nature-friendly farming and the market? And the biggest problem, in my view, and this is the problem which has been acknowledged over hundreds and hundreds of years, is that farmers are very small, and it's very difficult for them to interact with the market. It was possibly a bit easier when most populations lived in the countryside and lived in little villages. Then it was quite easy to get that connection between the farmer and the customer. So farmers are not big enough to negotiate and to change the terms of trade and to lobby and all that sort of thing with these huge businesses that they have to sell to, and nor are consumers, unless they got represented by really switched on political parties. But you know, that hasn't really happened because of the power of the lobbyists. They've even wooed the political parties. But I say that working together is different. So if we could work together, what are the solutions? And I've spent 25 years off and on lobbying. So, you know, I'm interested in this subject of what lobbying things could we do, what campaigning things could we do, and I think, yeah, I've done all of these things in the past. So class actions, you get groups of people together to say this food's poisoned me, and I'm going to sue Nestle for getting me addicted to Kit Kats or something like that, which has given me a tummy ache and given me diabetes and heart disease, and I'd quite like some money off you. So that's one of the things that we could do, you know, that people could do. Lobbying for a level playing field for fresh food. So I mentioned already that aviation fuel is untaxed. That's quite ridiculous. It should definitely be taxed. So we shouldn't be in effect subsidizing flying in potatoes from Egypt, or baby sweet corn from Florida or from Costa Rica and places like that. I mean, it's madness. But also, it's not only that, it's also the bargaining power, the subsidies, you know, all the little tiny incremental advantages which have accrued to a different system than the system that I'm sure we would all really want. Key to all this about fresh food is that that good food doesn't always look, because of the power of advertising and so on, doesn't always look most attractive. It's not necessarily the food that people are going to want to buy. So it's absolutely critical that good food is fresh, because fresh food is always more delicious. And if you're trying to fight salt and sugar as sort of the attracting things that people, you know, which will make people go back to their packet food all the time, then you've really got to have fantastic food, which is why I'm saying the solution is fresh food, because the very best tomatoes grown from your greenhouse on the most lovely soils will be, which you eat once, you know, 10 minutes after you pick them, will always be amazing. So that it's almost like I'm saying that is the solution. And we've got the most fantastic rare breed pigs, and then they're not very economic to grow. I mean, I estimated the other day probably cost us £1,000 a pig, and we've got to bring that cost down quite a lot. But that tastes unbelievable, and you know, you'll never want, I mean, I think you never want to eat anything else once you've tasted it. So it's about how do we make sure that food is cheap enough for everyone to be able to eat, and that it is much cheaper than the food that's bad for you. which is currently thought of as being the thing that must be produced lovely and cheap for the poor to eat. So we give them the food that's going to kill them, and then we've got to pay for them all to go to hospital. I mean, that's almost that's a caricature of the situation we're in. We need to rebalance that somehow, so that the best food is the cheapest food, and then it's going to be quite simple. The whole of the rest, well, anyway, not necessarily the whole of the rest, but that should be a powerful driver for getting the soil quality right, the mosaics of different habitats right, and all the other things that we need. I put down here as well, start private prosecutions for bad food. I haven't looked at the law on that at the moment, but why not? And put commission research. So if you were going to do private prosecutions, if you're going to do class actions, if you were going to lobby, you need to understand all these things back to front, so that you can have a powerful voice or win legal cases, obviously. First steps, but I've only got 3. And I'm suggesting that this is working together locally, because that's the audience that we are. My idea is that you get people like me so workshops hosted by farmers, and there will be other people like me going down this route or trying to go down this route. Get everyone onto the farm, have a look round, hear what the farmers have got to say about how they're trying to help nature, how they're trying to grow delicious food, whatever it is that's their particular passion that's relevant to all of this. And try and have some workshops and get some professionals in to moderate it. When I said attended by all, I mean, invite everybody. It's not just for the farmers, it's not just for the councillors, or even the food, people in the food industry, but just try and get a cross section of people, and people who are interested, and hopefully everyone's interested. And out of that will become the demands, the action, the real actions as to what we want to do to try and get nature to heal itself, and empower the farmers. And the farmers won't necessarily be these farmers; they might be future farmers who might come into the industry. If you make the industry profitable for small farmers, so they don't have to do it because they're passionate about it and live the life of a 18th century peasant hand to mouth, which is almost how bad it is at the moment for those sorts of farmers. But if between us all we can create profitable small farms creating fresh food for everybody, and that is the cheapest food, we will attract a lot more people in. So try and make these, if we do that sort of thing, try and make it possible for as many people from all walks of life to get involved. Then we'll create our demands, and then we start raising our funds. So that, I think, is the way that I would suggest that goes forward. There we are. And there's a picture from looking down over some of our land with those sheep they've just lambed. I think that's a year or two ago. I don't know which year that is, actually. I think that's this year. And those lambs have just lambed, and there's only about 30 ewes, but they give us lots of meat which we can eat in our restaurant, and it's amazingly delicious. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. That was tremendous. I'll just stop